At Thanksgiving dinner, my daughter-in-law handed me a card. It wasn't a greeting card. It wasn't a thank you note. It was a folded piece of cream-colored cardstock with gold edges, decorative, formal, deceptive. Inside, in handwriting as sharp as her voice, were the words, "We left, clean the house." I just stood there, still wearing the apron I'd put on at 6 a.m. that morning. The turkey was perfectly basted. The sweet potato casserole had just the right balance of brown sugar and cinnamon. I'd even ironed the tablecloth the night before and polished the silver that hadn't seen the light of day since last Christmas. I didn't say a word. I didn't gasp. I didn't cry. I simply tucked the card into my apron pocket, walked to the sink, and began rinsing the dishes they hadn't touched. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end, and comment the city you're watching from. I want to know how far the truth travels when no one wants to speak it at home. This Thanksgiving was supposed to be different. After 3 years of empty chairs and polite excuses, my son Mark had finally promised they'd make the drive from Oregon with the kids. He said it was time for real family traditions again. And I believed him. I even rearranged the living room to fit the folding table so the children could decorate sugar cookies after dinner. Just like Mark used to when he was little. My home smelled like cinnamon and roasted garlic. The heat from the oven made the windows fog up slightly, softening the view of the front yard where the leaves had turned a perfect burnt orange. I'd left the porch light on, hopeful. They were late, almost 2 hours late. But I didn't mind, not really. I told myself traffic must be bad. I texted once, just a simple, drive safe. Everything's warm and waiting. No reply. Then, the sound of a car door. I rushed to the front door, smoothing my hair, but only she walked up, Melissa. Alone, no kids running across the lawn. No Mark carrying a bottle of wine like he used to. She didn't hug me. She didn't even make eye contact. Just held out the envelope. I don't have time to stay. Mark's tired. The kids are cranky. We're doing our own thing this year, she said quickly, like she was checking off an item on a to-do list. I opened the envelope right there on the porch. Read the words twice. We left, clean the house. Not, thanks for preparing dinner. Not, sorry we can't make it. Just a command, a dismissal. I stood there as she walked back to the car. I saw Mark in the passenger seat, staring at his phone. He didn't even look up. My grandchildren were in the back seat, tapping on tablets, their little faces lit blue from the screens. I watched the car back out and disappear down the street as if I were a stranger on a doorstep they'd never knock on again. Back inside, the dining table looked too full, too festive, too ridiculous. 8 place settings, candles flickering, cranberry sauce in a glass dish shaped like a leaf, a bottle of red wine breathing in a decanter. Everything ready for a Thanksgiving dinner no one intended to attend. I sat down at the head of the table, slowly removed the place cards I'd handwritten in cursive. Mark, Melissa, Ellie, Jake. I set them in a neat stack beside my plate. Then I lit the fireplace, poured myself a glass of wine, and whispered to the flickering flames. So this is what family looks like now. I stared at the card again. My daughter-in-law's words repeated in my mind, looping like a bad song. We left, clean the house. They didn't forget. They didn't cancel last minute. They chose not to come. And not only that, they made it my job to tidy up a gathering that never happened. As if I were the help. As if I didn't matter. I didn't break down. Not yet. That part would come later. After the stuffing cooled, and the pie began to sag. Untouched. That night, as the wind rattled the windows and the last of the wine coated my throat like a bitter syrup, I made a silent decision. Next Thanksgiving, this house would still be warm, still full of smells and candlelight and memories. But not for them. Not anymore. The next morning, I found the card again. It had slipped out of my apron pocket and landed beneath the chair where I sat alone last night. I picked it up and stared at those 6 words like they might mean something else in daylight. We left, clean the house. My hands didn't tremble. Not this time. I folded the card neatly and placed it between 2 cookbooks on the kitchen shelf. Let it stay there like a pressed leaf from a season one was done with. The kitchen still smelled like roasted turkey and nutmeg. Plates sat soaking in the sink. Leftovers filled every container I owned. I opened the fridge and sighed. It was full of things no one had touched. I wrapped up each dish carefully. Not because I thought anyone would come for them later, but because I'd been doing that for over 40 years. Habits don't break just because people do. Every room in the house still carried traces of preparation, folded napkins. The kids' favorite board games stacked by the fireplace. Extra coats hanging by the front door just in case someone got cold. The only thing missing was the family. I didn't cry. Instead, I went about the morning like I had company. I made coffee. I warmed a cinnamon roll in the oven. I turned on the old jazz station my husband used to love and let the saxophone pour over the silence. I even sat at the dining table again, just one plate this time. And I remembered how, just a week ago, Mark had called and said, "Mom, we're really looking forward to being together again. The kids miss your cookies." His voice had sounded warm, hopeful, but now I wondered, had he meant it? Or had Melissa spoken for both of them when she handed me that card? Had he agreed? Had he known? It's the questions that come after the silence that hurt the most. They're louder than shouting. They fill every quiet corner of the house until you start answering them yourself. I stacked the dishes, wiped the counters, and vacuumed the hallway like she asked, like she told me to. But with every sweep of the broom, I felt something shifting. Not rage, not revenge. Clarity. They hadn't just skipped dinner. They'd erased me. Later that day, I received a text. From Melissa. No apology, no explanation, just a photo. It was a picture of their living room, Mark, Melissa, Ellie, and Jake sitting cross-legged on the carpet, surrounded by takeout containers and board games. A fire glowed in the background. The caption read, "Home is where the laughter is." I stared at the screen. The same board games I had dusted and stacked by my fireplace were now in their photo, apparently taken to their house before they even showed up. Which meant they never intended to stay. Maybe never intended to come at all. I turned off my phone and set it face down on the table. The silence in my house wasn't painful anymore, it was informative. It told me where I stood. Later that evening, I called my sister Ruth. We hadn't spoken in weeks. But when she picked up and I said nothing for a moment, she understood something had gone wrong. "You hosted?" she asked gently. "I did," I said, "but they didn't stay." Melissa dropped off a card. There was a pause. "What kind of card?" I told her, word for word. She didn't gasp. She didn't curse. She just let out a quiet sigh. The kind older sisters make when they've known something before you did. "I never liked how she spoke to you," Ruth said. I tried not to say anything. Because it's your family. But, there's a way people treat their elders. And she's never learned it. She's taught it to the kids, I said. Ruth didn't respond right away. She didn't need to. We both knew that was the part that hurt most. Melissa wasn't just pushing me out. She was replacing me in real time. Inside my son's house. Inside my grandchildren's memories. Later that night, I remembered something Ellie had said last summer. We were baking sugar cookies. Just the two of us. She was carefully placing the M&Ms on top when she looked up and asked, "Grandma, do you always clean because you're not good at games?" I'd laughed then, but now I heard it differently. Now I saw the shadow of someone else's voice behind hers. Maybe I was never meant to be part of the fun. Just the cleanup. That realization settled over me like dust I'd forgotten to sweep. That night, I sat at the kitchen table longer than I should have. I wasn't tired. Just still. In front of me sat the same centerpiece I used every Thanksgiving, an old ceramic cornucopia filled with artificial leaves and miniature pumpkins. I'd had it since 1989. Mark used to call it the Horn of Plenty, and fill it with candy when he was small. Funny how objects can outlast affections. I thought back, not just to yesterday. Not just to Melissa's card, but to every holiday, birthday, and Sunday dinner from the past 5 years. And suddenly, the moments began lining up like puzzle pieces. The time Mark texted last minute to cancel Christmas, said they'd keep it small this year. I spent the day alone, watching a Hallmark movie I didn't finish. The Easter when I was told the kids were too tired after their egg hunt with Melissa's family. They sent me pictures instead. Or Ellie's 7th birthday party, when I showed up with a handmade quilt. And Melissa asked me to drop it off at the side door, because the house was too full already. Each memory clicked into place, forming a picture I didn't want to see, but could no longer ignore. This wasn't a slip. It wasn't forgetfulness. It was design. Slow, quiet removal, a shifting of roles and places. One where I was no longer the grandmother who read bedtime stories or taught cookie recipes, but the woman who brought leftovers and left before photos were taken. I'd never confronted it. I always told myself it was just modern life. Busy schedules, blended priorities. But busy people still make time for those they value. They don't send cards that say, "Clean the house." I stood up and walked to the living room, where the fireplace still held the faint smell of last night's wood smoke. On the mantel sat a row of photos. One caught my eye. It was Thanksgiving 2010. Mark, Melissa, just newly engaged. They were seated at the same table, her hands still awkwardly resting in her lap. Back then, she was quiet, still figuring out her place. Back then, she called me Mrs. Anderson. I'd offered her my recipe binder that year, told her it was hers to build on. She smiled, said thank you, and handed it back. She never asked for it again. I thought that was humility. Now I think it was dismissal. 2 days after Thanksgiving, the doorbell rang. It was nearly noon, and I wasn't expecting anyone. I'd already folded the good tablecloth and packed away the porcelain turkey-shaped gravy boat. The house had been silent for 48 hours, save for the occasional hum of the refrigerator and the whisper of my own footsteps. When I opened the door, I found Sarah standing there. Sarah, my neighbor from across the street. Widowed 5 years ago. Quiet, kind, a little younger than me, but not by much. She held a small pie wrapped in foil. Apple, by the smell of it. "I baked too many," she said softly, almost embarrassed, "and I saw your lights were still off last night. Just wanted to check in." I stepped aside and let her in. We sat at the kitchen table, the same one I'd set for 8 just days ago. I poured tea. She placed the pie on the counter. For a while, neither of us said anything. It was the kind of silence women share when they don't need to ask too many questions. Then Sarah looked at me and said, "They didn't come, did they?" I didn't flinch. I simply nodded. She reached for my hand. And for the first time since the card, I felt something shift again, but this time, it wasn't a crack. It was a grounding. "You deserve better," she said. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't even bitter. It was said like a fact. Like telling someone the sky was blue or winter was coming. She told me about her son, Daniel, and how his wife had once called her the babysitter who overstayed. She told me about the time she wasn't invited to her own granddaughter's baptism. Because it was a small service. I thought I was the only one. I admitted. "We all do," she said. "That's how they keep us quiet." We sipped our tea, 2 women who had given everything, slowly realizing we were allowed to take something back. Before she left, Sarah turned to me and said, "If they ever do this again, don't be alone. You call me. We'll clean the house together, or not at all." She smiled, and for the first time in days, I smiled too. A real one. Not the kind you wear when people hand you insults wrapped in fake politeness. That night, I didn't look at old photos. I didn't scroll through social media. I baked cornbread. I watched an old black and white movie. And I wrote one sentence in my notebook, underlined 3 times. "I am not the help." A week passed. No calls, no texts, not even a belated, "Sorry we missed Thanksgiving," from Mark or Melissa. But something else came. A package. It was left on my porch with no note. Just a return address from an online store I recognized, one Melissa liked. Inside was a holiday wreath. Artificial pine, some gold ribbon, faux berries. Expensive, but impersonal. No card, no handwriting, nothing from the kids. It felt like a bribe. A way to cross my name off a list without effort or heart. I didn't hang it. I left it in the box, slid it under the hallway bench, and walked into the kitchen. I opened the notebook again and added a new line under what I had written days before. "I am not an obligation." Later that day, I called Ruth again. "I got a wreath," I told her. "From them?" "Yes." No note, just a shipment, like I'm a client, or a favor they're late on. Ruth didn't even pause. "Return it." "Really?" "You're not a donation bin," she said. "You don't need to keep what dishonors you." It was the word dishonor that stayed with me. I hadn't said it out loud, but that's what it had felt like. Not just disappointment. Dishonor. To be remembered not with words, not with voices or warmth, but with a box. Like ticking off a seasonal chore. That night, I dug out the photo albums again, not to mourn, but to remind myself. To remind myself that I had once been the woman everyone turned to. That Mark had once run into the kitchen with flour all over his nose, begging for another round of sugar cookies. That he had once written me a Mother's Day card that said, "Thank you for making everything feel like home." He knew how to love me. He was taught. It's not that he never had it. He just handed it over to someone who unlearned him. And I let it happen quietly. No more. I boxed the wreath again the next morning, sealed it, and wrote one line on the return slip. Wrong address. Then I walked to the mailbox, slid it in, and smiled, not because I was angry, but because I finally felt clean. The phone rang on a Thursday evening, almost 2 weeks after Thanksgiving. It was Mark. His name lit up the screen like a flare I wasn't sure I wanted to follow. I let it ring twice, 3 times, then picked up. "Hi, Mom." His voice was cautious, like he already knew something was broken. "Hi, Mark. I wanted to check in. Sorry we haven't called. Things have been hectic." Hectic. A word used to cover everything and nothing. I didn't ask why he hadn't come himself. I didn't bring up the card. I waited. He filled the silence. "Melissa told me she left you a note." "She did." I didn't know what it said until later. "I thought she told you we had a change of plans." "No, she told me to clean the house." The line went quiet. Then he sighed, a slow, low exhale that sounded like shame. "I'm sorry, Mom. That's not what I wanted. I should have said something sooner." I looked out the window. The street was empty, just the flickering lamplight on cold pavement. "You were there, Mark," I said calmly. "In the car. I saw you." "I know." "You didn't look up." "I know." There it was, the truth, finally spoken, resting between us like a box no one wanted to open. I didn't know how to say something without causing a scene. He continued. "The kids were tired. Melissa was upset. I just thought it'd be easier to go along with it." Easier. That word again. Easy for whom? Not for the woman who spent 3 days brining a turkey. Not for the grandmother who labeled every casserole dish with someone's name. Not for the mother who lit candles and prayed for just one dinner where everyone stayed long enough to finish dessert. I didn't raise Mark to choose easier over honorable. But he had. "Do they ask about me?" I asked quietly. He hesitated. "Ellie does. She wanted to know if you were mad." "Jake's, well, he's young, but they know. They know I wasn't there," I said. He didn't reply. After a pause, he added, "We were hoping to come by this weekend. Maybe the kids could bake something with you?" I looked at the empty counter where mixing bowls used to sit, where flour once dusted the edges like snow. I thought of all the things I hadn't said, of how easy it would be to say, yes. To let things return to how they were. But I wasn't going back. Not to being silent. Not to being the cleanup crew. I wasn't angry. I was awake. "I'll think about it," I said, "but next time you come, bring words, not silence. And make sure the doorbell rings because you want to be here. Not because she told you to." He was quiet again. Then, softly, "I understand." We hung up. And for once, I believed he did. That weekend, they didn't come. Mark didn't call again. No text, no follow-up. But I wasn't surprised. I'd left the front porch light off. Not out of bitterness, but because I was no longer keeping the house lit for people who didn't want to step inside. Instead, I spent Sunday afternoon with Sarah. We made soup, laughed about old movies, and swapped stories we'd never said out loud. Not because we didn't want to, but because no one had ever asked. At one point, I told her, "It's strange how long it took me to admit I was being erased." She nodded. "It always starts small. Then one day, you look up and realize you're not in the picture anymore." That night, after she left, I sat by the fireplace. I'd burned the card the week before. Mostly. I'd torn it into pieces and fed them to the flames. One by one, but I kept a small corner. The piece where the gold trim curved. Unmarked by ink, just a blank edge. I pressed it between 2 pages of my notebook. Not as a keepsake. As a reminder. That silence can look beautiful, polished, respectable. But that doesn't make it kind. As winter crept in, I decorated the house with smaller things. No garlands, no 12-person tables, just a wreath I made myself and a single strand of lights in the window. I didn't wait for them. I didn't chase. I simply lived. One quiet, intentional moment at a time. Sometimes the kids would pop into my thoughts, Ellie's curls, Jake's gap-toothed grin, but I let those memories sit gently. Not as pain, not as longing. Just as proof I had loved. And still could. Just not at the cost of myself. Maybe one day they'd come back, not out of guilt. Not because someone told them to, but because they missed something real. Until then, this house is still warm. The oven still works. The fireplace still crackles. But the door only opens for those who knock with kindness. A few mornings after the first December frost, I opened my mailbox and found a letter. Handwritten, no return address, just my name in neat cursive across the envelope. For a moment, I thought it was from Ellie. But it wasn't. It was from a woman named Carol, who used to attend the same church I'd stopped going to after my husband passed. We weren't close, but she'd always been kind. The kind of woman who brought homemade jam to bake sales and hugged with both arms. Inside the envelope was a card, not flashy. Not gold-rimmed, just simple cardstock. Folded once, with a short note. I heard about Thanksgiving. I wanted you to know. I saw you. All those years. All that effort. You made things beautiful. That mattered. It still does. I sat down right there in the hallway and read it again. Not because it was dramatic. But because it was enough. Sometimes, we spend so much time waiting for acknowledgement from the ones we raised. We forget that other people saw us too. Other women, other quiet witnesses. And sometimes, their voices carry the validation we stopped expecting from our own. I placed the card next to my notebook. Next to the line that read, "I am not an obligation." And I wrote a new one beneath it. I am remembered, even when they forget. Later that afternoon, I saw Melissa's car drive past my street. She didn't stop. She never does. But I no longer flinch when I see her. Because I no longer look at her expecting recognition, or change, or repair. She is who she is. And I am still who I've always been, only now. I remember it too. That night, I made myself a cup of peppermint tea, lit one candle, and wrote Christmas cards. Not to them, not this year. But to the people who'd shown up. To Sarah. To Carol. To Ruth. To myself. Dear me, I wrote in one. You're doing just fine. On Christmas Eve, I made soup. Nothing elaborate, just potato leek. The kind my husband used to request every winter. I set the table for one. No centerpiece, no candles, just a cloth napkin and a heavy spoon. I wasn't sad. I wasn't even lonely. There's a difference between being alone and being erased. This was solitude. Chosen on my terms, not silence gifted by others. But quiet I had earned. I ate slowly. Looked out the window. Watched a few snowflakes drift past the street lamp. The kind of snow that never sticks, just dances a bit. Then disappears, still beautiful, even if it doesn't stay. The doorbell didn't ring. And that was fine. I didn't expect it to. At 8:17 p.m., my phone buzzed. It was a photo from Mark. Ellie and Jake in matching pajamas, holding a gingerbread house. Below it, just 2 words. Merry Christmas. No, we miss you. No, wish you were here. Just 2 words sent from a distance. I stared at the picture for a long time. The children looked happy. Their hands were sticky with icing. I imagined the scent of cinnamon, the sound of giggles, and then I closed the photo. Not out of pain, but peace. Because I had spent years attaching my worth to invitations. To holidays. To their approval. But not this time. This time, I let them celebrate without me. I let the memory of me rise in their minds, or not at all. And still, the soup was warm. Still, the night was good. After I washed the dish and folded the napkin, I sat down at the fireplace and opened my notebook again. The pages were almost full now. I flipped back to the beginning. To the line I'd written after that awful card. I am not the help. And beneath it, the one I'd added weeks later. I am not an obligation. Tonight, I wrote one more. I am not waiting anymore. I closed the book. The fire crackled. And I knew, deep in my chest, that this was not the end. Just the beginning of being full again, with or without a seat at someone else's table. January brought a quiet snow. Not the kind that causes traffic or school closures. Just a soft, steady fall, blanketing rooftops. Slowing the world down. I watched it from the armchair near the window. A place I'd claimed for myself since the day after Thanksgiving. No more hovering in kitchens. No more setting tables no one would sit at. I was learning to sit still without waiting. That week, Sarah and I started a little tradition. Thursday mornings, she'd come over with muffins or scones. And we'd sip coffee by the window. No agenda, no planning, just presence. One morning, she brought an old photo album, her grandkids from years ago. We laughed at crooked baby teeth and terrible haircut choices. Then she said something that stayed with me. I used to think the best parts of life came when the house was full. But now I realize, sometimes it's when the noise is gone that the real things settle in. She was right. For years, I thought family was defined by blood and obligation. But now I was starting to see it differently. Family could be two widows with shared stories and warm scones. Family could be the neighbor boy who shoveled your sidewalk without asking. Then waved shyly through the glass. Family could be quiet mornings, a good book, and knowing your worth doesn't shrink just because someone else stopped noticing. That weekend, I printed out a new photo for my mantle. Not of Mark, not of the grandkids, not even of my husband. It was a picture Sarah had taken, me sitting in the armchair. Cup in hand, snow falling behind me. I looked peaceful. And strong. No forced smile, no apron, just me, as I am now. I placed it right in the center of the mantle. A different kind of family picture. One where I was no longer waiting to be seen. I already was. One evening in late January, I lit a fire in the old brick fireplace. Not because it was cold, but because I had something to let go of. I opened the drawer in the hallway where I'd hidden the last piece of that card. The gold-trimmed edge, blank, clean, untouched by Melissa's words, but still a remnant of them. I held it in my palm. It was so small now. Just paper, but for weeks, it had carried the weight of being dismissed, used, overlooked. And now, it didn't. I walked to the fire, held it to the flame, and watched as it curled, blackened, and disappeared. Not with anger, but with clarity. I wasn't burning pain, I was releasing it. I turned and walked to the living room. On the shelf sat my notebook. The one I'd been filling since that day. Page after page, not just of grief, but of reminders. Of truth. Of new beginnings. I flipped to the very last page. And wrote. The house was clean, but not for them, for me. Because that's what it had always been. Every table I'd set, every pie I'd baked, every floor I scrubbed after a gathering. It was never about the thanks I might get. It was about creating warmth, stability, care. And just because they stopped seeing it, didn't mean it stopped being true. The warmth I gave still lived here. Still filled these walls. It just no longer reached people who refused to feel it. I stood by the window, looking out at the porch. The same porch where Melissa once handed me a folded card. The same porch where I'd waited, alone. Now it was quiet. But it wasn't empty. Because I was still here. Still whole. Still standing. The fire crackled behind me. My chair waited patiently. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't need anyone to walk through that door to feel like I mattered. I mattered already. Not because I was needed. Not because I was thanked. But because I was. And that, after everything, was enough.